Hi, I'm Liliana Partida, the staff nutritionist at the Center for New Medicine. Today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about diabetes. Now, unfortunately, diabetes goes undetected most often because we're really not looking at the markers that will really identify a type 2 diabetic patient. Most doctors will do standard testing of what we would consider fasting glucose. Well, fasting glucose is just a marker that says how well did I metabolize from my last meal. You'll notice that they usually ask you to fast for at least 8 to 12 hours prior to getting blood tests so they can kind of see how cell sensitive you are. But this oftentimes can be misleading because I have had many patients that were actually shocked at our results in regards we let them know that they are a type 2 diabetic, which is a pre-diabetic state, and then also that they are in full-blown diabetes. And they might say, well, I can't believe that. My doctor's never even mentioned that to me. He's always said that I was within, what we would consider healthy glucose levels. Well, the one way to really tell if you are pre-diabetic or diabetic is by a marker called hemoglobin A1c. And this is a marker that tells how your cells utilize glucose over a 3-month period. And honestly, this is really the only way that we can see if you truly are a diabetic or a pre-diabetic state. And so again, there's different ranges depending on what labs you look, but we look anywhere from about 4 being the lowest to somewhere around, we say above 6 you are pre-diabetic, and above 7 you are definitely a type 2 diabetic. And so again, we start to think about how can we back up before a person ever even gets into those levels. And so we start looking at markers somewhere around 5.5 that we start saying, okay, now we really need to pay attention. Because what most people don't realize is that when you are a diabetic, your cells are no longer utilizing glucose the way they should. And so they become hard like cement rather than allowing you to eat a meal, and then insulin, which is the vehicle, takes those calories and drives them through the cell wall and takes them to the muscles and then transfers them to liver, and then it's stored in excess, which would be either in your blood or your fat cells, is that insulin can be resistant because you've exposed yourself to too much sugar in your diet. And oftentimes people say, well, I don't eat sugar, but yet they eat pastas and breads and noodles and crackers and chips and bananas and tropical fruits that are loaded with a lot of glucose. And they don't think of that. They think of candy bars and cookies and other things. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But when you become insulin resistant, where the islets should allow the glucose to enter beautifully, it's stiff and doesn't allow the portion complete to go in. So what happens is a small amount will go in, it'll give you the energy that you need, but a very short window. So if you go to a gas station and you fill up your gas tank, you get really about 400 miles, right? But when you eat a meal, you should get really about 3.5 to 4 hours worth of running time before you get a signal that I'm hungry again. But a lot of diabetics, what they'll do, since they're not getting the glucose into the cell wall, they're hungry every 2.5 hours, sometimes even 1.5 hours. So again, this could be a clue for you, is that you're not really getting all of those calories that you did consume into the cell wall to use for energy. The tendency of, we call glycemic spin, meaning that, you get really hangry. It's like, oh my gosh, I need to eat it, and I need to eat right now. And because glucose is dropping so significantly, and that's not good either, because nobody wants to be ruled by their food. We want to have stable glucose so that when we eat a meal, we can run on that fuel for at least 3.5 hours. Then we get a signal to the brain. It says, hey, you're passing by a gas station. Don't you want to top off? You're on a long journey. And this is where the snacking comes in. We go into the kitchen, and what do? We most often eat something that's very easy and visible, like a banana or an apple or crackers or cookies, things that it's instant. And again, what does that do? It floods the body with more glucose. So I tell my diabetic patients, rather than taking in more sugar, why don't they use something that doesn't have a glucose influx, like some fat, a handful of nuts, or a tablespoon of coconut oil, or a tablespoon of almond butter. And then that way, they don't have this disruption of the insulin levels. They eat a meal, the body's under the influence of insulin for 3.5 hours. 3.5 hours, they get a signal, they use some fats, the blood sugar stays stable. Because when you have insulin in your blood, you don't burn fat for fuel. And if you don't burn fat for fuel, then I can't use those extra stored calories that are in my fat cells. we turn them into ketones and use them for energy for our brain and for our metabolism. But if we're grazing all day, is which diabetics like to do because they never get a full tank of gas, then they're eating all day long. And when do they burn fat for fuel? They don't. And so our goal is to try to stabilize the glucose, not only so that you can run on a full tank of gas, but so that you can have good mental clarity. Because when you eat too many carbohydrates, this is a sign. Is I eat a meal and all of a sudden I start to get really sleepy. Now, most of you will notice after, even at a dinner party where they're serving pastas and bread, you can see the diabetics that are at the table because they're at the table after they eat and they're wanting to almost fall asleep right in front of you. And this is intoxicating the brain and really putting you into what I call, not really, but kind of a similar diabetic coma state to the brain. And really, who wants to not have that good memory? And we call dementia type 3 diabetes. And so, when your doctor tells you your glucose is not stable and that you need to pay attention to it, then you need to take it very seriously, because sugar is a causal effect of many things, not only dementia, but also cancer feeds off of glucose, candida feeds off of glucose, many opportunistic organisms, that is their fuel. So why do we want to give these opportunistic organisms their fire? We don't. And so keeping your blood sugar stable, not only will you have a mood that's not up and down, reactive, but you have good thinking capacity and you're not going to be ruled by your food. So a hemoglobin A1c is the marker that we're looking at kind of as the gold standard to see if you're really a pre-diabetic or a diabetic person. And we have many ways to treat this. And so I'm not into lifestyle, I'm into life changes, okay? Because lifestyle means I do it for a while and I get to where I want to go and then I might go back to my old style. But a life change means that I start really doing things that benefit my chemistry so that I can avoid disease and that I can have better mental quality and energy. And face it, who doesn't want that, right? And so again, we are living in a society where the supersize is the norm, supersize drinks and supersize this. And we don't need it. We have a lot of excess that we actually don't need. And unfortunately, this is why we are, I would say, let's see, we were head and head with Mexico in diabetes. I think that now we're a little bit higher, but I think it's, I'm not sure, don't quote me on this, but I think it's like India that's got the most, right? And so what we want to say is we are not a third world nation. We have every information at our fingertips and everything we can do to treat this. And so when your doctor tells you, your blood sugar is higher than 5.5 on an A1c, then you want to be very sobering about that and say, right here, right now, I want to start going backwards. I want to start coming to someone like myself or to a person that you might have in your office and really get some solid science to how much sugar is in the foods that you're consuming. I mean, who would ever think that a sweet potato would have 45 grams of glucose in it, or a piece of bread, 18 grams? Well, by the time you know it, you're at 50 grams of carbohydrates for each meal, and that's going to take us way over the edge, especially as we get older. We don't need it. And so there's many ways to treat pre-diabetic or diabetic issues, and that is through a variety of things. One of my favorite things is Berberine. Berberine is an herbal supplement that works on 3 pathways. It works on cholesterol. It works because, remember, and you may not know this, is that when I have too much sugar in my diet, or even excess protein, which turns into glucose, that it puts it in the blood and it elevates our triglycerides. And so again, what we want to really start doing is saying is that what we eat matters, and anything that is from the plant kingdom really is a glucose, whether it's a vegetable, a fruit, a bean, or a grain. Those things that when I can squeeze water out of them after I cook them, like let's just say spinach and mushrooms and broccoli and asparagus, those are very, very low in sugar. But the things that when I cook that I can't squeeze any water out of them, like carrots and beets and corn and peas and potatoes, those are a starchy sugar. And now we want to be more careful on how much we want to put on our plate. So then I would say, well, let's use those as condiments rather than the main event. I can't squeeze water out of a carrot or a potato, so they're stubborn foods. And those foods that actually get larger when I cook them, like rice and pastas and pizzas and bagels, they have the highest amount of sugar with the least amount of nutrition in them. So I say anything that expands is going to expand our problem, which will be expanding your glucose levels, expanding your waistline, and that's not what we want. As we, become more mature and more sobering about, anti-aging, we want to really look at all of those things that can keep our memory as bright as possible and our energy as uplifted, and not to be ruled by always needing to eat. And so I hope you've learned a little bit today about some of the markers that you might want to ask your particular doctor. Fasting glucose isn't going to give you that information, but a hemoglobin A1c will. And then what to do about it. And so, of course, we have many courses that we teach here at the center on Zoom. And I want to also mention that stress in and of itself can make you a diabetic. I've had many patients that have come in and said, oh, their diet's really good. And then I say to them, okay, well, in order for you to have this diagnosis, you have to be under a lot of stress. And they go, how did you know that? And I say, well, because your diet isn't really the causal part of this. It is the fact that you're under stress and your body's constantly under cortisol, which is a stress hormone, and stress hormones need energy. So what's your body going to do? It's going to dump glucose in your bloodstream to facilitate this fight and flight. Now, again, once the stressor is over with, what's my body going to do? It's going to say, go replenish what I dumped into your bloodstream. And then you get that sugar craving. And then you want to have those chips and you want to have the crackers because salt and crunch also support your adrenals with stress. So if you're craving specific foods, then you got to pay attention. Do I really need these because I'm hungry, or I'm emotionally in need of a massage or a walk or connecting with people? You'll notice now you probably peruse the kitchen a whole lot more because we're more in a confined state at home. And so what you want to do is say, if I'm not hungry, let me drink some water because I could be dehydrated, and let me go for a walk. So you have a great day.